Alright, so I am working on a C++ program that works with OpenGL, and I'm pretty much messing around with graphics. And I've managed to create a program that will generate any object as long as I define the vertice, and it will draw it for me. This is kind of looks like an egg shaped, but it's supposed to be a sphere. At further distances, it looks kind of egg shaped, and I'm not entirely sure why. I think it's because it's extending uh, on the z axis, which is in my coordinate system is moving uh, into the screen or out of the screen, and the y is up and down, the x is left and right. And I'm just playing around with texturing the sphere and as well as some collision detection. And so far, we have collision detection. It's not very smooth though. I don't like how it snaps back so quick when you um, hit the object. But all in all, if you're controlling, say, a actor, um, say your actor's on the um, sitting on the sphere on top or moving around it, is somehow connected to the sphere using gravity, you'd be moving the actor and it'd be walking along. Um, and I don't think this collision detection would be all that great. Not entirely sure how to fix that, but I don't know. What what I have right now is it calculates the normal vector of each of these planes, and there are quite a bit of planes in this. Um, and I use 3 points of the triangle and the plane to calculate the normal vector, and then I subtract, do a cross product to find the normals, and then I do a dot product of the normal vector and my normal vector of the camera currently. And if they happen to, I believe it's less than zero, double check that code. Um, where are we here? So let's go to main game. And the collision is down here, really simple collision. And it is less than zero. Let's see here. Yeah, greater than zero. So I have it greater than or equal to zero, because this should be if they cross each other and you dot them, or you dot them and then multiply that dot by the first check, which is the dot product of the normal vector with the camera position with a couple other variables. And then I take my first check and I multiply it by the normal vector of my vertex that I've vertex dot product that I had calculated earlier in the Genesis file here. The Genesis file pretty much combines everything, puts everything together like it's pretty much the glue of this program. So it does all of my calculations and drawing uh, before rendering. And right here uh, is the calculation of the normal vectors and the dot products. and that calculates the normal vector, and then I can compare that with the normal vector of my camera, and this is the result. Which isn't very smooth, and I have it basically taking the last camera's position and setting it equal to camera position once that is greater than 0, so it just snaps me back. And I think maybe like performing, I'm not entirely sure how to go about doing that, but I think maybe smoothing it out somehow, some way. Not entirely sure, but let's see if we can make this sphere look a little more spherical. I know by increasing uh, the amount of points, it's going to make the texture kind of particle-like as you move out, kind of like how you see it fuzzy in the distance. It just looks like a bunch of particles. That's how it will be once I add the or increase the amount of points. But as you move in, it gets greater and greater detail. Personally, I think just this detail is fine, but it's always nice to get more detail. So we're gonna go ahead and try that. And one thing that I've ran into, and I'm still trying to deal with, is I store for each object, I store data for that object. That way I can change something later if I want to. Say I wanted to increase the I wanted to increase the how large it is. I could do that, or if I wanted to translate it somehow or move it in the world, or even break it apart, I could do that using, if I store the information, the night later I could just go ahead and, okay, well, I need to access this object and change these points, and maybe a door will be broken or something like that. Or I can somehow create, I don't know, like destructibles or something. But I'd like to store the data as a whole. I don't know if this is the correct way to do it. I haven't had any classes or anything on OpenGL. This is all self-taught. And the camera was probably the most difficult thing to counter at first, but that was done fairly within within a week or so. I made that camera pretty nice. It just goes in a 360 everywhere. I can. It's like flying a plane. You can go, or not a plane, but I guess if you're in space, you can rotate anywhere you want. You can go upside down. You can go from bottom to top to the back. It's really cool. I know that I probably should have later when I add actors and things like that. I could mess around with that more, but that's just for kind of editing. Um, so what I was mentioning with the vertex data, so I have to hard code how many arrays of my combined vertice data that I have. I have to hard code that, and I really don't want to do that. I want to be able to change that, but I can't do that with this. I'm not entirely sure how to change it. It has to be a constant, and I've been researching a couple things on how to change this number from an outside function, but I can't do that for some reason. I'm still researching that, trying to figure that out. I tried using a vector of GL floats, and that didn't work either. I think I still have to mess around with a couple things. It keeps telling me that the range, it's not within a range, so the array is not like large enough or something. I'm not entirely sure what the cause of that is. I've tried it a couple times. It just hasn't worked. I passed it along here in this buffer data. So I combined. I tried a couple things. First I used the size of vertices, but supposedly it's the size of a GL float multiplied by the size of your vertice, and that didn't work. I passed along the the first vertice, telling OpenGL, okay, this is where it is. It still didn't like that. It actually read through it, but then later it said that it just crashed the program. So I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. I really want to use vectors instead of GeoFloat that's hard-coded, but for now we'll just use hard-code. And it sucks because sometimes I'm not entirely sure like how many vertices I have until I create the object, or I guess I can probably use a calculator and figure that out too. Wouldn't be too difficult. But sometimes let's see, so up here, how I create the sphere is using, I believe, Parametric. Yeah, Parametric system. And I go from 0 to 2 pi in increments, and from the negative radius to the positive radius, and that creates a sphere over time. And I store those points in the position vertices. I also give it a color as well. Then I take all that and I turn them into triangles. There's probably a better way to do this. I think like GL elements or something is another, probably a better way to do this. That way I don't have to define every single triangle. But so far it's works pretty well, except when I do that. What did I do? Oh, did I change something? Oh yeah, I didn't give it a number. So I know this is bad, but we're gonna do it anyways. I'm just gonna give it a lot. A lot of arrays. Make sure we have enough arrays, and then I'm gonna go ahead and increase the multiplier here by a factor of 2. And I should get my sphere again. Oh my gosh, it's so far away. And here I get more points, which gives me more detail. And I just have one texture covering this right now, just to play around with. I'm still learning how to texture a sphere. It's really quite interesting. As you can see here, this texture it gets stretched because there's a point here and then points out here. Actually, you know what? So if we go GL points, we can make some points here. And what is that going to change? Is it going to change anything? We don't want to texture it. So we're going to have to change the stride to 7. And I think we'll change, make sure it doesn't have a texture. And this is my Genesis code right here. So I have texture and color. And this number is 0 is no texture, 1's a texture, color, no color. This is the scale, angle, or not scale, translation. Let's see here. Yeah, so it's scale, rotate, and angle, and then the world position. So this would be the scale, this would be the rotation. If I wanted to rotate it, translate it, do whatever I want. And then where I set it in the world, it sends it over to my Genesis file, which maps out, pretty much separates the data, creates, does quite a bit of things. There's a few things I'm still changing, still working on. It gets better and better over time. But what I do is actually store the vertex data for that object, its position, its texture, vertices, the color vertices. I create the combined vertices, so I have to combine each one of those vertices in order. I don't know if this is probably the best way to do it, but it's worked so far. It seems like a long way to do it, but as long as you define the position vertices, the color, and the texture coordinate vertices, then it will combine all of those and then throw it into the buffer data and create the object that you want to create. And what were we doing? We were in here, we were changing the sphere vertices. Let's see, main game. Yeah, so we changed that, and let's go ahead and start it. So we should get a bunch of points. Whoa. Oh, yeah, that's not good. When I create points, I actually have to change a couple things. For my collision detection, because it's not supposed to, actually what we could do to change that real quick, it's actually calculating the dot products of 0, so it's like it doesn't really work. And I'll put an and here, has color equals 1. So both those have to be true, and that way it won't calculate collision. I guess it's still calculating. Oh, because I have to change some things in that code. So we'll just get rid of collision for now. Where are you, collision? I know you're in here somewhere. Yeah, there you are. So this is just to show the points for the sphere. Should probably increase my speed a little bit more. Actually, let's go and do that. So let's go to the camera. It's down here. And let's see, speed. Let's increase my speed to 5. I think that's a good number. Yeah, there we go. Now we're moving. So these are the points that the sphere is made out of. And one thing I find that's an issue is how far of a distance it is between this point or these points and these points. I want to create points right here in between, going in all the way to here, so I can make planes that have a texture, so it doesn't stretch the texture between, a large triangle. That's one problem I'm having, and this is at a factor of 2, and it's pretty nice. It's pretty close. It's almost like a plane. Not quite. We can get it even closer, but I think if I do any more, it might I'll have to hard code my array to a larger size, but we're gonna try it anyways. Where's my sphere? It went away. Why did my sphere go? So get rid of that. We don't need that. We don't need that. There it is, way at the end. Why is it at the end? So we'll increase the multiplier to 4 for theta. So it's gonna have a factor of 16 times 4. So pi divided by 16 times 4, and it increases the amount of, or it decreases the length between these. And when it does that, you can have more triangles. More triangles make it obviously mean a better graphics. So you're going to have a more defined texture. Although if you don't have a texture that's, wrapped correctly, it's not even going to look that good. That's why I'm still kind of testing out the texture wrapping on a sphere. It's really interesting. I don't think I also have to mess with some shaders, and I'm not entirely like 100% on fragment and color shaders or vertex shaders. I'm still learning the GLSL programming language, so I'm learning what I can do there, what I can't. Like I said, it's like all self-taught, so still learning all of this. I'll probably increase more points here. Try to, anyways. I'm not entirely sure how to do that. I know it has to do with my equation. Where is it? It's in sphere. So in my equation using parametric equations here. So it starts with like 0, 0. Somehow I don't know why it increases the distance between the first and second one goes is so much. It should get smaller and smaller as I increase the fraction, add a smaller fraction of theta each time, but it doesn't seem to do that. See, here it's nice, but when it's that close to the, or when it's at the starting point, it just doesn't want to go. It doesn't want to create another circle here. This is really interesting. I could also increase the amount of points around each circle, which gives me, again, more detail. I'll show how that looks. It probably won't look all that great when I texture it, and that's because more than likely it's the texture or just how I'm doing it, or the shaders, no lighting, the distance. There's a lot of factors that come into play there. Let's go ahead and add texture to it now, and we have to go back to sphere, and we have to change the stride to 9, and I think that is all. Yeah. Let's just texture it now. Oh, what did we do? Oh, it's still in points. Ha! It's like a disco ball. Huh. Trippy. Yeah. It's like texturing each point. And this is just a random texture I grabbed offline to play around with. But we had to make them triangles. See how we're a far distance, and you see it's not very defined at all. But as you move in, it's still not defined because it's so small of a triangle. But as you move in closer and closer, it gets more defined and looks more and more like how you want it to look. And looks very, very spherical compared to the other factor of 1. But one thing I've noticed is this has to change. Like, oh man, I'm moving too fast. The object is really small compared to how fast I'm moving. And if you see this little point right here, that's not what I want. I want it to come out, make a circle, come out, make a circle, come out, make a circle, and then start going around in a sphere. And that's just something I'm just gonna have to play around with until I get that correct. You can see the little hump right there. Just like a quick, yeah, there you go. That's a good view of it. It doesn't look good at all. It's not supposed to look like that. It's supposed to look like that. Not a hard angle like that. But again, if we move into the sphere, you know, it looks all fuzzy and particle-like. Really doesn't look good at all. It's probably because I'm texturing like a million of these textures, so each one of these textures on here are one JPG file. And if you can imagine all of those spheres or all those planes being textured, but it looks really good when you move into it. I mean, the level of detail, but I think it looks just fine with using a factor of 1, as long as I fix the edges or the points here, the starting point and the end point. I hate how that works right there. How that textures looks horrible. Not something you want, that's for sure. I think as we move out, right? Yeah, I'll have to find a way to fix that. But for now, we're gonna go back into the vertex. We're gonna make that hard-coded. I hate doing that. And we'll change, I'll change this back to 1. And this back to 1. And that looks, I mean, you could actually tell as you move closer. But it just, I mean, the level of detail is definitely not as the same as making all those triangles. It just, you could tell that it looks like a plane there, and then it has those hard edges right there. It just doesn't look as good. But most things, you know, if you're just trying to make something that, you know, looks okay, I guess you could do this. But I'd rather do it the other way. And soon I'll fix that. That's just a pain in the ass. Now it actually looks like a sphere with points on it. And I've actually added a grid system too, and I'm not entirely sure like how to do the grid, you know, how to make a good grid. My grid so far just has a couple points from -10 to +10 in each direction, and we'll go ahead and put that on the. So there's my my grid system there. And that is a size of let's see, that's 2. Yeah, so that's 1, 2. It's a 2 by 2 sphere because it goes from -1 to 1, so it's 2. And I can increase that size, but I have to hard code it for now. I did add something for typing in and then translating it, or increasing the size or angle and rotating it and things like that. But what I really am working on, or want to work on, is being able to click this object and rotate it and pretty much do whatever you want to it. Still working on that it's probably my next project that I'm going to work on. But this, came after I created a whole bunch of boxes. I was messing around with things, created the lines, the grid system, created the Genesis file, which pretty much takes any object as long as I define it, and draws the object. It's kind of like if you mess with Blender and it gives you, you could probably use the vertex data from Blender and then throw it into this Genesis file and it'll draw it for you, as long as it's not in elements. But that should be an option too, maybe later, that I'll add, is whether or not you want to use an element array, which I haven't messed around too much with. I've used a lot of vertex arrays mainly. And let's see. So what else could we do here? Well, yeah, so far, like, I've just been kind of hard coding some things in. Like, a lot of these functions are in structs. They're not actual CPP files. So I'm just creating a struct, creating the data for each of the objects that I want to create, and then loading that data, using that data to load into my OpenGL Genesis file here, or CPP file. It's not too bad for not like knowing too much about C++ and OpenGL. This is all like self-taught stuff. Didn't take any schooling. I read a couple books. Most of the books are they use specific. They might not use OpenGL. They might use like different Windows. Like one uses, I think it was like an old, out of date. I think it was Glut or something like that. Not Glut. It might have been. I forget what it was. It was old and out of date though. Anyways, most of the books that I've found, like I'm sure there's a lot more. Maybe I'll look a little bit harder. But I also need to go into vertex shaders and learn more about that. But let me say tell you a little bit of how this Genesis file works, or the CPP file. So what I do is I actually create my object. So I have an object that I define. Say I have a sphere, and this data could actually go into a file that you have stored, and then it could read from that file. And the functions would still be in here, but all the data, like the vertex data and everything, the vertices and all that, would be in a file. So it would read from the file, and I mean that's something that can be implemented easily. But for now, what it does is, say I had this sphere here. I have my colors, my textures, coordinates for the bottom left, top right, and bottom right for plane. And what I do is I define my x, y, and z using these parametric equations. It creates the vertices required, and then I take those vertices and then I make them all into triangles, or actually I put them into planes. So I have six points that are connected in as a triangle near each other. So 6 points. Well, 4 point. Using 4 points, I connect. I use 6 of those 4 points to create 2 triangles that create a plane, and I do that for every single vertice. So if I start from the first vertice, um, I make a triangle um, with the one to the right, and then the one to the uh, one with the one below it, and then that gives me one triangle, and then I use the point on the top right to go to the bottom right, and then the bottom left, which gives me another triangle, and it gives me a plane. And I do that as many times as I have vertices. So I'm creating quite a bit of triangles using this function here. And then I actually have I could probably I didn't want to change a lot of things here, so I just it was just messing around with, and then I changed this will change later, but I set the position and the texture and the color equal to what I calculated up here. And then I have these private variables that can be changed, like the theta multiplier, the theta. Um, I should probably set this pi to a constant, but for now it's going to say a float. Actually, I don't think you could do it a constant float, but yeah. Anyways, that's is what it is now. The radius. A couple things here that are needed to correct for this was really weird when I had to correct for when you are at the end of the unit circle, you go to the next um, uh, point, but that point is moved in space so many. Uh, it's at a different point than that. If you were to think of a unit circle, if you're going around in a circle, you finally drew that circle, and now you want to move forward and draw another circle um, at a different uh, at a different place. And then when you want to connect those two, when you reach the end, it wants you can't connect the end, the very last point with the point right next to it. It wants to connect to the point that is on the next unit circle that you created. So I had to put in a correction factor to correct for that. It was making a weird triangles in the sphere. Um, and let's see. So this is my enum. So this is the size. I set a multiplier equal to my stride, or equal to the vertices, and then I have a stride. The stride is just used for OpenGL. The size is also used for defining the combined vertices. And then you draw your triangles, and you have it all set there, right? And then it jumps so that's defined, and you go into your the Genesis file here, and you start with Genesis begin, and what this essentially does in the beginning is it resizes um, the VAO, the array object, and resizes the vertex, which is this vertex right here. So this is vertex. If I was drawing one object, this would be vertex object number 1. And I'm thinking of a way to define each object so I could find it if I wanted to. I'm not entirely sure how to implement that yet. But after the Genesis, actually, no, that's not where it starts. Where it actually starts is down here, and a function called God mode. And I pass along these certain things that you saw in the main game. where it has defined it, whether or not it's a sphere, just certain variables that I need. And here is actually something that I'm working on still. This is just kind of hard coded just to test things out. It could be changed. Actually, it's going to be changed later. But anyways, if it's defined, certain objects defined, it's like, okay, well, I'm going to draw a cube. Well, okay, what do you have to do for a cube? And most of these things are just, they're copies of each other. So that's going to be really easy to combine into one function later. The one difference is when you're drawing, say, a sphere or some object that's obscure, it's different. It has a lot of different points. It's not very symmetrical. Then you have to define whether, okay, well, what kind of type of object is this? Is it a sphere? Okay, well, there's certain parametric equations you have to use for a sphere, and we have to make sure those are generated. Although, what I could do is probably define those equations when before the function is even called, so you wouldn't even have to call it; it would just already be there. That's one thing, couple things that I'm still thinking about adding and changing in this Genesis file. But focusing on the sphere, I actually create the sphere here, which that could be changed later. And then I set each vertex data that I have stored, that I want it to store, and be able to change somehow later if I wanted to. And then I could redraw the object because all the data is already there. I could do that. Say if I wanted to blow the object up, and I just wanted to make the vertices change over time or something like that and just fly away and disintegrate, I could do that. As long as I store the data. If I don't store the data, then I have to redefine the data, and that's just a pain in the ass. Why would you want to do that? So I store the data. It could probably be stored somewhere else other than the actual program. It could be stored into a file or something like that, like I had mentioned earlier. That wouldn't be too difficult. I define all these things, and then they actually create where do I go here? So we go into vertex data. So then I just store all the vertex data, the position vertices, the color vertices. I combine the vertices into a GL float that OpenGL can understand and read from. That's something I'm still looking at, and that's where I talked about hard coding the certain array here, which is a pain in the ass. Changing that soon, but I hard code it. Alright. I define the combined vertices using all the color vertices, texture vertices, and position vertices. And this works for almost pretty much any object that you want to create. Let's see. So I go down into calculating the normal vectors, and then I store all the data and the scale, rotation, angle, and that could be changed and then updated later if I wanted to. Let's see. So then so I take the model and the scale, and multiply the model and the scale, and then it transforms it, and I send it. That data is actually stored, and then that's used later when I want to draw the object. So then we go up. Eventually, it it's going to reach the drawing phase. This couple things. This actually doesn't need to be here. I could change that because that's just defining whether or not I have certain. It's defining a stride, but that was just used because it's not used anymore. But then I go into the draw function, and then I actually draw the combined vertices that I just created based on whether or not I wanted to draw a sphere, a cube, lines, whatever I want. And if I wanted to give it color, no color, texture, no texture, so on and so forth. And I have certain arrays for my array object, my vertex array object, and each one of those arrays stores the data that I want it to draw. So it takes that array and then binds the attributes and the texture and the color, and makes that array so I can use that later. And where I use it is actually in the main game. So once that's all done, it throws away the data. It's like, okay, you're good. You got this array full of data, and now you are able to use that data for drawing. So then it comes down to my actual rendering function and throws it into, well, it first binds it goes through all the different array objects that I have, and then draws them based on what they are, transforms them into the world, and draws them. Throw away that data, swap the buffer, and yeah, your result is this guy. Well, that and whatever else you want. I could draw pretty much anything using that Genesis file. There's a few things I'm obviously going to change with it. It keeps changing over time, but when I get into being able to click this object, and if you've ever used an editor like I don't know, Skyrim or something like that, then you'll have an arrow pointing up, an arrow pointing left, and another arrow pointing towards you, and you could take those arrows and you can translate it, or you can rotate the object, or you could pretty much do whatever you want with the object. I want to be able to copy paste that object, so if I wanted to make another copy of it, things like that. Eventually I'm going to be able to do all that. So, but let's see. I think I'm going to work on a couple things, and not entirely sure what yet. But we'll get around probably the hard coding. I don't want to hard code stuff. So this is something that's really important that's bugging me out. So I'm probably going to work on that next and fix that. Anyways, that's a short little stream of what I'm working on and what I'm doing with C++ and OpenGL.